Like I say, I'm going to do things a lot different today. I wanted the Lord's Supper not to be something we just tack on at the end of the service or to do in the middle of the service, but for it to be the full of the service. To look at why we have it, why it's so meaningful, and the comfort that it does and should bring to us. And I want to do that by looking at an I will, and I will, and I am, and an I have. Go ahead, Lori. The first I will is of Satan. The second I will is what the Father said to the Israelites whenever he freed them from Egyptian captivity. The third is the I am statements of Christ in the book of John. And then what the sacrifice, what the broken body and the blood exchange, spilt and exchanged for us truly brings us. Isaiah chapter 14. It seems kind of weird to begin a sermon on the Lord's Supper with Satan. But I want you to look at his fall and why he fell. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. How you are cut down to the ground. You have laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. You see in this passage what the fall of Satan was, is that his life was the opposite of humility. It was the opposite of care for others. It was the opposite of sacrifice. Filled with pride, he said, I will ascend to heaven. Filled with pride, he said, I will sit with the Most High. Filled with pride, he said, I will sit with him in the highest place. Filled with pride, he said, I will be more glorious than anything else that God has created. I will be unlike anything else on earth. I will be like God. And you remember, in the garden, we've looked so much at this year that hopefully you remember it. These are the very things that Satan tempts Adam and Eve to try to achieve by themselves by eating the bitter and the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He was cast out of heaven for that. And then he comes and continually bombards Adam and Eve. And finally, one day, I don't know the circumstances that surround it, but one day his argument, his temptation got through, and Eve was deceived, and he said, I will make you like God. I will give you a seat that no one else can sit in but God. I will make you more glorious than anything else. All you have to do is eat from that tree. You find that in Genesis 3, 4, and 5. But the serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You see, Satan tried to say to them, God doesn't want you to be all that you can be. He knows that you will be like him. And so in his pride, he had fallen. And then because of his fallen state, he knew that man was far greater than him, and he longed for them to fall as well. And he tempts them with that same pride. He tempts them with that same selfishness, that same lack of sacrifice. this is the problem that we've been examining this whole year so far. The problem that plagues man, and the problem that plagues all peoples. Now, I want you to keep that thought in the back of your mind. Okay? Satan, I will ascend on high. I will be like God. I will be more beautiful than anything that's on the earth. And then him tempting Adam and Eve to that, and they succumb to it and eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Keep that in the back of your mind, and let's go to Exodus chapter 6. Because of that fallenness, the people would not listen to God. They held lightly the things of God. And the book of Exodus begins with this statement. Now there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt who knew not Joseph. Now why did he not know Joseph? Because the Israelites had stopped telling the story. And because of that, because of their lack of remembrance, because of their lack of worship, because of their lack of continuing to worship God and the miraculous thing that he did through Joseph to not only sustain them, but to bring them into a land of plenty. Right? Because they held that lightly, they were finally taken into captivity. And after God calls Moses, and then Moses goes and confronts Pharaoh, and Pharaoh hardens his heart, and God hardens it further, and the plagues strike Israel, we find ourselves in Exodus chapter 6, verses 5 through 9. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the peoples of Israel, that the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the people, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with outstretched arm and great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people. I will be your God, and you shall know I am the Lord God, who has brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for possession. I am the Lord. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. I want to make just a commentary here for just a moment. I talk to so many Christians and read so many Christian writings and hear so many Christian podcasts and things like that right now. There are so many Christians who are operating because they are looking so much at the world under a broken spirit. The broken spirit, right? And because of that, they're missing out on the things that God has offered us, the things that God pleases us with. He told them, I will deliver you from the Egyptians. I will deliver you from slavery. I'll deliver you with my outstretched arm, and you can watch the plagues take place. You will see my power. I will deliver you with great acts of judgment. I will deliver you. You people who forgot to tell my story, you people who haven't worshiped me in generations, you people who have forgotten me, you people who have forgotten the great things that I've done through Joseph, you people who haven't thanked me, I will deliver you as my people, and I will take you into a land. Now that is what that first Passover meal depicted. And it preceded the 10th plague. Moses was to tell the people, to tell Pharaoh, let my people go, that they might worship me. The people didn't listen. They could have walked out. As many of them as there were, as strong as they were through the hard labor that Pharaoh had put upon them, they could have just walked out, but they did not listen. And so God then sends Moses to Pharaoh. Let my people go that they might worship me. And then that 10th plague comes. And he says, here's what will happen. The destroyer will come. And he will move through Egypt and kill the firstborn of every family. Unless it has the protection of Christ passing over that house where the destroyer cannot come. And that will take place if you believe me. I want you to take a lamb of its first year. I want you to bring it into your house, a little lamb. I want you to get comfortable with that lamb because I want you to have it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, it would have a name. 2 weeks, you'd probably be playing fetch if lambs can play fetch. If not, you would at least be watching it bounce around. But then you would have to present it for death, which would bring sorrow. Our sin, our rebellion against God should bring sorrow. And then once that lamb has been prepared for a meal, they were to cook it not in good tasting spices, but in what? Does anybody remember? In bitter spices. It was to be a bitter meal. Bitter because of the death that their sin had caused, the sorrow that it brings, and bitter in their mouth and bitter in their bellies. Now, the Passover meal consisted of bitterness, right? That its purpose was to avoid death. Its purpose was to cover up. He would pass over, right? It doesn't mean he passed by. He passed over, right? He covered them up to cover up the people's failure. It involved death and sorrow. But here's the cool part. It was a mere shadow of the true reality that was to come. That lamb that each family had kept in their house for 14 days was a picture of the coming Christ. Now, the thing about this meal was, it was temporary. It lasted for how long? 364 days. Therefore, every year they had to eat this bitter meal, to go through this bitter process of getting the lamb, of bringing it into their homes, of preparing the lamb for a meal. And those of you who are adults, you know what I mean, right? And then cooking it in those bitter herbs, dressing yourself, standing ready to run in a night of fear. It was a continuously bitter meal that the people endured for centuries. Now keep that in the back of your mind. So you've kept the arrogance of Satan, the moronic behavior of Adam and Eve, that's in the back of your mind. And then the promises of God that the people didn't hear or want or put themselves into position to receive. Right? Keep all of that in the back of your mind, and let's move to the New Testament and see the I am statements of Christ. I am the bread of life. 6:35, 4:8, 4:51. I'm the bread of life. I am that which will keep you alive. I am the light of the world. I am the one that will bring you out of darkness to let you see the bountiful goodness of God, to let you see the very person of God in His Son, and ultimately face to face with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the full of the Trinity. I am the door of the sheep. I am the way I am the entrance point, for you to enter into this bounty. I am that door that will check for any pain, any impurity, anything that would mar you before you are taken to the Father, that I may take care of it, because I am the good shepherd. When I find that which is wrong with you, that which is unclean in you, that which would mar your relationship or your entrance into your introduction to God the Father in the land that He has prepared for us, I will take care of it like any good shepherd would. So I am the bread of life that will sustain you. I'm the light of the world that will show you the way, show you the Father, show you myself, show you true truth. I am the door through which you will pass, that I might find any infirmity, anything spot or blemish with you. I am the good shepherd who knows how to care for it and will care for it. And then I am the resurrection and the life. Because the only way for those impurities, the only way for that curse to be removed for us, the only way for that bitterness and that selfishness that indwells all of the progeny of Adam is through death. But I will be the resurrection for you and the life then that you live beyond there. And as you walk that way toward God, I am that way. You'd never be away from me because I'm the very way. I am the truth. In a world of assumption, in a world of lies, in a world of difficulty, I am the truth. And when it seems like death is all around, I am the life. And then I am the vine, the true vine, that which will sustain you and make your life meaningful and purposeful and fruitful. You see, the I ams of Christ speak of Christ's work, Christ's life in us, to produce His character in us, so that others might not see us, but in seeing us, see Him. You say, but what are you talking about? Well, you remember that when Christ was on the earth, He says, if you have seen me, you've seen what? The Father. He said, I will give you everything that is needed so that when people look at you, they will see what? Me. Now, not in the glory and the power of Christ, but in the giftedness and the goodness and the sacrifice of Christ. My peace I'll give to you. My peace I'll give to you. And I will take the enmity against God. I will become His enemy. He will cast every bit of His wrath against me. I'll give you my peace, and I'll take your enmity, your warfare with God against myself. My joy give I unto you. I will be that man of sorrows, acquainted with grief that Isaiah talks about, that you might hope in God and know that God in me will never see any flaw in you, but only have pleasure at every moment, at every hour of every day of every week throughout all of eternity, that His blessings might be yours. That's awesome, right? And then I will give you the fruit of the Spirit that will make you like me. Peace, love, joy, kindness, gentleness, patience, meekness, temperance, and self-control. Those things that the world does not have, that Satan cannot have. You see, those are given to us that we might reflect Him in our lives. That those are His characteristics. And now He gives them to us to eat. And He doesn't call them bitter herbs. He calls them what? What is the opposite of a bitter herb? A juicy peach. Right? opposite of a bitter herb? A nice, ripe, delectable strawberry. What is the opposite of dried out rosemary? A juicy watermelon. What is the opposite of pinto beans? Joy. You see, the fruit of the Spirit that He gives us to eat, they're who He is. That's what His character is. They're not just qualities. That is Christ living in us. His gentleness, His power, His love, His peace, His joy, that we might reveal Him. You see, in the Old Covenant, by the way, y'all know New Testament, or Testament just means covenant. So you've got the story of the Old Covenant and the story of the New Covenant. And the Old Covenant was based upon the promise of God and then the expected response of men. I will do this if you what? Do that, right? They didn't even hear it, so much less do it, right? So they didn't receive the promises of God in the Old Testament. Right? All of those people who were released from captivity, they saw some of the fulfillment of it, but not all of it. Right? In fact, all of them who went out, who were over 20, never made it into the land. They never found that pleasure of God to be called His people in that most intimate of sense. But you see, the if-thens of the Old Testament, Christ fulfilled all the thens and then gave them to us. He fulfilled all the requirements, not only of the law, but of the Old Testament, so that the promises of God might flow freely to us. The positive responses of God established forever in the new and the last, the eternal covenant of God. The covenant that Jesus established that we will celebrate today is based upon a better lamb that provides a better meal. Go ahead, Lord. It's based upon a better lamb that provides a better meal. There's one last bitter meal to eat, and that's the cross, right? And that is where we eat His flesh, as it were, and drink His blood. Then we are given that bitter meal, a meal that's the opposite of bitterness, the one of succulent fruit. His body is broken into bite-sized pieces for all who, like Jacob and Joshua of the Old Testament, simply believe God. Believe He can overcome anything and cleanse a sinner as dirty as I am, and be faithful in all things, and overcome then anything that stands against us. With all of that in mind, look at Luke 22. And He broke bread. This is that last bitter meal. They have just had a bitter meal, right? With dry bread with no yeast in it that just dries your mouth out, and the bitter herbs, right? Like eating the white part of a lemon. They just had that meal. And Jesus looks at them in Luke 22, and He takes the piece of bread that was never eaten before. You know, in that, we've talked about the Passover before. He pulls out that one piece of bread that had never been eaten before. And when He had given thanks, He broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you." You deserve the brokenness. You've broken the world, and by the world you are broken. And you have added to the brokenness not only of your lives, but other people's lives. Right? You have dealt falsely with God. How many of y'all, even who are Christians, have made promises to God, and then whenever He came through, you went, yeah, okay, and forgot? Right? Your body, which should have been broken, which is broken, and should have been annihilated, I'll make it mine. This is my body, broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Now I want us to celebrate the first part of the Lord's Supper. Deacons, come forward. And remember, at this moment, you are waiters for God. And beloved, we offer this meal. It is hosted by the members of Wildwood Baptist Church. But if you are here and you are like-minded with us in faith and practice, we invite you to join with us. But I want you to remember at this moment that you are not receiving a piece of bread from Robbie and Tim and Bob and Cody and Brian and Ray and Roy. You are not receiving a piece of bread from them. You are receiving abundance from God. Your mind, I now want you to pull them to the front of your mind. Now I want us to look at one more passage before we complete this meal. I want us to look at John chapter 13. After saying these things, verse 21, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you seated with me here at this table will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at the table at Jesus' side. And Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus said, "It is to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." And when he dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. By the way, what love there was in that, he was telling Simon, "I know you're going to betray me tonight, and you can't complete this meal." But he dipped the bread in the juice, into the wine before he gave it to him. And if Simon would have just come back to the true temple, the true priest, rather than taking the silver and trying to take care of his own sin back to the temple and the corrupt priests and threw it in, he could have been saved. This was for all men. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. And Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do quickly." I want you to notice something absolutely gorgeous. That this is, the 200th time that I have presided over this meal. More than that, probably. And it had never struck me before that it was during this meal that evil was dismissed. And if this meal, in its entirety and its meaning, is consumed by us, do you understand what happened when Christ took our place, his body broken for us, and then as we will celebrate in just a minute, his life poured out that it might be poured into us. His life given to us. Evil was entirely expunged from us as far as the blessings of God are concerned. As far as our ability now to worship God, to live properly in this present age. To die without fear, knowing that we will live forever, because by this meal, by Christ dying in our stead, evil utterly dismissed. 28 years of presiding over this meal. I never saw that. And I saw it this week and my heart went, ooh, that's awesome. And I was truly and utterly overwhelmed with thankfulness for what he did. I know it's in me. I feel it. But I know it has been dismissed. And when the time has come, it is gone. Right? That I am right with God. But not only is our evil nature removed with this meal, but his life is poured out and then poured into us, that the life that I now live is the life of Christ. My hope of glory is Christ in me. That's my hope of glory. The life that I now live is Christ living in me. So not only is evil, my evil nature removed, dismissed by God, it is replaced by the divine nature of his Son living in me. That's what the second element of the supper gives us. The first one is solemn, and it should break us and drive us to tears, as we just sang. But our drops of grief cannot repay the debt that we owe. So Christ's body was broken to pay that debt. But then his life was given that I might take it into myself and no longer be bound by the chains of evil, but freed by the righteousness of Christ. So the first part drives me to my knees in sorrow. The second lifts me to my feet in thankfulness. Deacons, if you will. John chapter 15. I am the true vine. Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. We leave that meal open. And I want you to notice in those verses that the amount of fruit that Jesus declared, that a communion with him would produce, is much fruit. Not just occasional fruit, but much fruit. And it's not just a possibility, it's an expectation. And so as we have partaken of this meal today, I pray that that fruit would replicate itself much in your lives. If you have been overtaken by anger, let his peace prevail. Let that fruit be much in your life. Apathy, let his love prevail. A lack of self-control, let his love prevail. A hard spirit or an anger spirit, his gentleness and his kindness. He will bear within us much fruit. trying to find a passage that I'm looking for. But I can't seem to. Galatians chapter 4. Don't know what verse. Let each one test his own work. And then his reason to boast will not be in himself, nor his neighbor, but in God. You see, the result of this meal, it is a remembrance of our salvation. But the result of this proper meal is Christ-likeness. That's important for us to understand. It is possible to undertake great ministries and things like that, to give away all of our goods and our own life, and it be nothing in God's eyes, unless it is done with love. Unless we are walking by the Spirit, bearing the fruit of the Spirit. The great problem, I think, with contemporary Christianity is not so much not learning the right things to do, but in not learning how to do the right things. We can do the right things, but be bitter about it. Complain about it. Think of the sacrifice about it. You see, the great problem in modern Christianity is not knowing the right thing to do, but knowing how and why and in what spirit to do the right things. The problem is not to discover what love looks like, but how to love by the Spirit of God. It's what he means when he says, walk by the Spirit. I want to end, go forward and see if this verse happens to be there. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Right there. Oh, back. John chapter 6. Jesus says, eat my flesh, drink my blood. We talked about this a lot a couple of years ago, but I want to talk about it again this morning for just a moment. You remember that in the first meal and then all subsequent meals, not just the Passover meal, but every meal that the Israelites ate, they were not to partake of the blood. They were not to drink the blood. God was not satisfied with the blood of bulls and goats. You know why he says not to drink the blood in the Old Testament? Because life is in the blood. He doesn't want us to act like animals. But now he says, drink my blood. His life is in that you partook of, that you remembered this morning, that we might be like him. And then in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul is talking about this, he says, O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? Death is swallowed up with victory. We eat this meal and death literally becomes our daily substance. Why are we scared of something that we eat? It seems like what is going to be eaten should be afraid, not that which is eating, right? We die daily. I want you to think, I thought of this while we were singing, so just bear with me for a moment. I want you to think about the best days in your life. For most of us, we would say one of the best days in our lives was when?
She said yes.
When Vicki, against all advice from her parents and all of her friends and everyone in Lenore City who knew her, said, I do. You know why that was one of the best days of my life? Because I looked at her And I knew at that moment I would do anything for her. I would give up anything to make her happy. I would endure anything to make her happy. I would give up my own life to make her happy. You know, when Paul says, I die daily, we don't know what it means. That's what it means. I knew that day that anything that was needed in her life that I could provide, I would sacrifice anything for it. That's what it means to die daily. And you know what? She did the same for me in return. Right? That's the best day of my life. You know when the best day of my life was? When Micah was born. And you know what I knew when I held that little life in my arms? I would do anything. I would give up anything, up to and including my own life. That's what it means to die daily. You know, we think these abstract thoughts. Well, what does that mean? That's what it means. Think of your marriage and the vows you made. Think of holding that new life. You know when the next best day in my life was? When I became the pastor here. And I looked out at you good people who were willing to take a chance on a 24-year-old goofy, skinny little kid from Lenore City. And not give him a job, but give him a life, a purpose, a ministry. And I knew at that moment that I would give up anything, right, to serve you to the best of my abilities. Now, I'm not always fulfilled that perfectly with Vicki, or with Micah, or with y'all. But I know those were the best days when I had decided to do it. You know when the next best day of my life was? We'll get Will in here. Right? When he was born, I knew when I held him that I would do anything for him. I would endure anything for him. That my life was meaningless in comparison to his. That's what it means to die daily. We hear die daily and we think, oh, that's a horrible thing. Man, that's the best days of our lives when we learn that. This is what this meal is telling us, right? Don't be afraid of death. You're Death Eaters. Now, not in the Harry Potter sense, right? But you're Death Eaters. Death is afraid of you. Death knows if you die to yourself, you become the most powerful thing in the universe. And don't be afraid to die to yourself. Think of your wedding. Think of the birth of your children, the adoption of your children. Think of those days in ministry. Think of those times when you were truly unselfish. Those are your best days, right? Let us remember that as we end our service.